but you pursue the priesthood because it's the thing that the Lord has called you to. And that which he calls you to is the particular path to holiness that he wants you to follow for your own salvation.
Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Continuing the Call, a seminary dropout's guide to discernment. Today I'm joined by my friend Father Sam Kachuba. Father Sam is a priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut. In this conversation, Father Sam shares about his discernment journey, how he ended up in the priesthood, and all of the tips he learned along the way. He also shares about just living a good Christian life. Father Sam is involved in quite a few different projects, from podcasts to work with the Catholic Psych Institute. All of that is linked below, so make sure you go ahead and check that out after the episode. As always, I ask that you say a prayer for Father Sam and for all those he ministers to, and of course for all of those in discernment of their own. I also ask that you say a prayer for me. I have quite a few different projects going on, and your prayers are greatly appreciated. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Father Sam Kachuba. There we go. Father Sam Kachuba, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us kind of where you're coming from?
Sure. My name is Father Sam Kachuba. I'm a priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut. For almost 10 years now, I've been pastor at St. Pius X Church in Fairfield, Connecticut, and I've been a priest for 16 years.
Awesome. I love it. There's so much to dive into. But first, I have to say it's so nice to see you again in person. I've been listening to your daily reflections, your daily gospel reflections on my way to and from the school.
Oh, good.
So it's so weird, like hearing your voice and seeing you like, oh, wait, I know what he looks like.
Well, thanks for listening. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, it's great. And we're going to dive into all the stuff you have going on, and we'll link all that below. But let's go and start way back at the beginning. So you've been a priest for quite a bit, but where did it start? Take me through the origin stories of Father Sam.
So it really wasn't until I was in 8th grade. I went to a Catholic school, and at the end of 8th grade in the yearbook, I found out that I had been voted most likely to become a priest by my classmates, which, when you're 13 years old and you hear something like that, you think, my friends think I'm a total dork. I'm never going to have a girlfriend or something like that. So I really wasn't so thrilled about the idea of being named most likely to become a priest. And so, like, to the 8th grader mentality, that's the worst thing you can possibly say to somebody. You're never going to have a girlfriend. You're a dork, whatever else you might want to say. And so I was kind of thrown off by that. But I remember I complained to the pastor. I like ran into him like, you're not going to believe this, Father Tom. They just named me most likely to become a priest. And he said, what's wrong with that? I said, I don't want to be a priest. And he goes, well, listen, if God's calling you to be a priest, it's a great life. And I always remember how he was very open about that. And wasn't offended that I didn't want to be a priest. And I thought, so he doesn't think that everybody should be a priest? And then I started actually learning about, like, later on, as I started learning about discernment, I thought, oh yeah, definitely not everybody should be a priest. That's a really good call. But I tell people all the time that I decided I would prove my classmates wrong. And so step one was to go to a Catholic high school. Step two in proving my friends wrong was to join the youth group at the parish. And step three in proving my friends wrong that I wasn't going to become a priest was the first club I joined in high school was the club that was in charge of all the school masses and serving and setting up and providing music and everything like that. So I was doing great on the I'm not going to become a priest thing by choosing all these very religious sort of activities. So I think God's providence is all in there, because it was through the youth group that I was introduced to Eucharistic adoration. It was through Eucharistic adoration that I was introduced to just that time and face-to-face contact with the Lord that I had never really experienced before. And then from there, it was the youth group took us on a little retreat. And during the retreat, priest gave a talk about the priesthood and asked us to pray and ask God to tell us our vocation. And so it was my sophomore year of high school was the first time that I actually prayed to know what God wanted me to do. And in that experience of prayer, I heard the call to the priesthood for the first time. It's something other than a yearbook superlative. It was actually,
I was going to say, someone who actually had authority over you and was in control of your vocation.
Yeah, exactly.
So as you're growing up and you're kind of having these experiences and you're drawn to, youth group and altar serving, things like that. What was your spiritual life like? Were your parents encouraging it? Or I guess kind of where do you think that was rooted in? I mean, because surely you're looking around and kind of like, well, your friends are all doing it. You're kind of maybe taking it a bit more seriously. Where do you think that came from?
Yeah, I think it definitely starts at home. My parents were big about, we always went to mass together as a family. We prayed grace before meals. We prayed before going to bed at night. Um, so it was definitely instilled in me that the faith was something important. Uh, but I would also say that we didn't have any practices that for some families are very normal. Like we didn't pray the rosary together as a family. We also didn't have any practices that kind of sometimes feel intimidating to people. Uh, but we did a lot of the stuff. So when my parents decided to send my brother and I to Catholic school, I was in fourth grade when we started going to Catholic school. And a big part of it, my parents explained, was that they really wanted the faith to be something that was part of our everyday experience. And they also felt like they needed support in teaching the faith to us. That I had questions and they didn't always know the answers, so they figured a Catholic school would be a helpful place. Um, and so I think the combination of Catholic school and a strong family where we were going to mass together really clicked something for me, because now the faith wasn't just something that was at home or that was just with my family. Practicing the faith was something that I did even with my classmates. Like I could walk into the church and everybody knew when to genuflect and when to sit, stand, and kneel for mass. And it wasn't like I was the only one who went to church.
Yeah.
Granted, as a third grader, you're not really necessarily thinking that too much, but it was there in the background.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so now going back to your sophomore year of kind of hearing that voice, hearing that call, what did that kind of manifest itself as for you?
Yeah, I tell people that I've only heard, I think, the voice of God two or three times speaking to me. And one of those times was the call to the priesthood. And it was something unmistakably outside of myself. Not so much an audible voice, but a an experience like nothing else that I've ever had. Uh, it was as clear as anything, be a priest. And it was like something echoing in my heart, but it didn't come from inside me. It came from very much the outside. Um, and as I experienced that, as I heard it, there was this internal, no, I don't want to. There's this internal fight, and then almost like uncontrollable moving, where the priest invited everybody who thought that God might be calling them, or who just wanted to be open to the possibility that God was calling them to be a priest, to come forward to receive a blessing. And so as he's doing the altar call, I remember saying mentally, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here. And I was saying that as I was walking up towards the altar. So this experience of no, I don't want to do this, was just completely overwhelmed by a real movement of grace. So yeah, I think it was that moment where it was hearing it, but then as often happens, you go on a retreat, and what do you do after you come off retreat? You go right back to the way things were before. That retreat high really kind of wears off quickly. And I remember almost forgetting that I had that experience. I didn't forget it, but in some ways it felt like it. And my religion teacher at the high school pulled me aside after class one day and asked me if I'd ever thought about becoming a priest. And I looked him in the eye and I said, no. So I lied to
Wow.
my religion teacher, is what I'm telling you. And then, having lied to my religion teacher, I was at a youth group event, and there was a woman who volunteered with our group who had not been at the retreat with us. And she said, I think you'd be a really good priest, Sam. And I didn't know why she would say something like that, because that was not the topic of conversation. It wasn't something that had come up in our group or anything like that. But there she was offering it. And then I was at mass, and a little old lady at the sign of peace turned around and shook my hand and said, "You should be a priest." And so there was a lot of voices suggesting all of this. But the one that finally got through to me was, I had a girlfriend. I was a sophomore in high school. It's before I was a priest. It's okay. Uh, and I was sitting with her on the couch one day, and she like leaned her head on my shoulder, and she just looked up at me and she goes, "I think you're going to become a priest."
Oof.
Remember? Yeah, right. Oof. I said, "Did you just break up with me?" And she said, "No, I just think that you're going to become a priest." So here's this experience of a call, a spiritual moment with God. And what it took for me to start thinking and like actually get my mind going and start thinking more practically, more seriously about it, was a whole lot of people, a whole lot of people whose voices I could hear very tangibly and whose opinions somewhat mattered to me, saying you should be a priest. That got me to say, okay, I will start to discern this. I'll start to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in hindsight, what a grace. Because I think that, like, and I get it. I know so many people listening who are probably like tired of that, tired of being that young guy or a young girl at mass, and everyone's like, yo, you should be a priest, you should be a sister.
Yeah.
And they're like frustrated with it, but like, what a grace that, the Holy Spirit's using people saying, no, no, like, here's your nudge, keep going.
Right.
Because yeah, we're stubborn, we're stiff-necked, right? We don't want to follow. So in hindsight, all those people oftentimes do become a massive grace and that voice of reminding us of that call.
Absolutely. To have that, and this is a thing. Um, Vianney Vocations talks about this and a lot of their promotional material. They say like lend your voice to Christ.
Yeah.
That the good thing that God is trying to make happen, that he's speaking to the hearts of somebody, sometimes needs a human voice to amplify it. And so when there's somebody out there who's not afraid to say, hey, have you ever thought about the priesthood? Have you ever thought about religious life? Or just to encourage it to be that voice that's very tangible for a young man or a young woman, it makes a huge difference.
So now, with all these voices and with the Holy Spirit, you decide to enter the seminary. What was that experience like?
Uh, it's really funny. I always tell people, I think I keep saying I always tell people this because well, as you can imagine, I get asked this a lot.
Mhm.
What's the story? Uh, it took me the rest of high school really to figure out yes or no to going to seminary. But I went in right out of high school, and part of the reason for that was having gone to visit. We had a college seminary at the time, and having gone to visit our college seminary, I was really struck by the men who were there because it wasn't just the college guys, it was also the pre-theologians. That is, the guys who already had a college degree and had been working and had discerned a call, and so were starting out their philosophy studies in the seminary. As I was meeting them, what I was seeing was all these guys who could have done an awful lot of other stuff. There's a guy who left behind a really good corporate job where he was on the path. This guy was going to climb the ladder. Every year there was another promotion scheduled for him. He was going to do really well for himself in corporate America. And he decided to put that on hold to come and discern a vocation. There was another guy who had been a professor. There's another guy who owned a small business. So these men had put everything else on hold so that they could discern their vocation. And I was looking at myself, not yet the holder of a high school diploma. I was thinking, what do I really have to lose here? Because
Yeah.
if I go to the seminary, and it's not what God wants me to do, if I go in and the Lord does not want me to be a priest, I will leave seminary with at least part of my college education finished, if not the whole thing. I don't have a job. I don't have a business. I don't have a career path or anything, but I can go to the seminary and with total freedom start to discern. If God doesn't want me, he'll tell me. And in a year, I'll be transferring to another college or something like that. And so I realized that because there was absolutely nothing for me to lose, I might as well give it a shot.
Yeah.
That might not be the purest motivation,
Hmm.
but it was an important realization for me to understand that I had no excuse not to go. I had plenty of experiences of feeling God calling me to the priesthood. The idea was there. It wouldn't go away. I had confirmations from so many people who thought that I should become a priest or that at the very least I should go to the seminary. Every time I turned around, it seemed like somebody else was suggesting it to me. And I realized I'm just making up excuses for myself here. So I think I really need to go. Another really big part of it was not just like the sense of I'm making excuses, but I want to figure this out because my thinking was if I go to college, I'm going to have a miserable first semester and probably a miserable second semester because the idea that I should be a priest is always going to be somewhere in the back of my mind. And it's going to make me second guess everything that I do. It's going to make me not want to engage and be around people. It's not going to be a good thing for me. So I said, I need to get this out of my system at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think people downplay that reality of like, yeah, curiosity, while not the most, not the ideal circumstance, is certainly a viable reason to explore the seminary or explore discernment. Because like you said, that could be how God's calling you in the beginning, right? I think of Zacchaeus, right? Like you can climb a tree just out of curiosity. Like you really can just be curious about like, man, I wonder what that's like, or where this priesthood thing even starts, and like that might be the entrance way in. Same with that idea of, yeah, just getting answers. Like that's okay. Like we're called to ask and to seek and to knock, and to not just think that I'm going to seminary because I'm absolutely called and I'm going to be a priest. Like you can kind of be unsure, and it's a good place to go.
Yeah, I think that was an important component of the way that seminary was presented to me. The idea of going to college seminary was presented as this is for guys who think they're called to the priesthood,
Yeah,
not for guys who are called to the priesthood. This is a place that you go to figure it out, and a place where you open your heart up to explore it, to understand it better. And I realized I had so many questions about priesthood. I had so many questions about God, what God wanted me to do. But I also, even with those questions, had this very strong sense that He was calling me. I just didn't fully understand it. And I needed a place where I could go and work that out. And the seminary was the perfect environment for that for me.
yeah, absolutely. So when did that shift though? When did you realize that, oh, I am being called, and not only am I being called, I want to be called? What was that kind of revelation look like for
Yeah,
you?
I think it took a full year in seminary. Um, Now, keep in mind, my first year of seminary, about 12 days after we started was 9/11. So there was a major world event that shook the culture. And I mean, from where my seminary was, we're in Stamford, Connecticut. We could drive down to the water, and we could see the smoke coming from the towers.
Wow.
Um, so we were in very close proximity. There were a lot of people in my diocese who work in New York City, who commute there every day, and so it hit home for a lot of us. And this was a major major event, obviously. And so there's a lot of fear, but out of that story also came so many stories of very very heroic priests who were there. The first casualty of 9/11 as a Catholic priest, Father Michael Judge. So there were a lot of those kinds of stories coming out, which were really helpful. But then that academic year ended with the spotlight scandals in Boston, and so just hearing stories of clerical sexual abuse, they opened up the files in my diocese, and there were more than one priest that I knew who were removed from ministry, and that was a hard thing to witness. To start wondering how do people look at me if this is the story and I want to become a priest and this is what people are thinking priesthood is. I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if this is really the right fit. So there are a lot of questions and a lot of fears that were kind of swirling around there. And I had the chance at the end of the year to go to Mexico for 6 weeks to do a Spanish immersion program. And I was 19 years old and had nothing else to do. So I said, sure, I'll go. And it was great. Phenomenal experience. Really nice to go and experience another country, another culture, to learn a language and everything. And the food is great. So I thoroughly enjoyed myself, but it didn't clarify anything for me about my vocation. If anything, there was a lot of clinging to Jesus in those moments when I didn't know enough Spanish to get by, and realizing I really just need the Lord to be here with me. And so finding solace in the tabernacle, but not really doing a whole lot on the discernment front. And I remember coming home and being kind of confused as I was coming back. Like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do. And the vocation director told me, well, World Youth Day is in 2 weeks, and we have a group from the diocese that's going, and you're going to go with them. Okay. So 2 weeks later, I got on a bus to go to Toronto, Canada for World Youth Day 2002 with John Paul II. And it was the end of World Youth Day. And I think it was at the very end. Um, Something that John Paul said um, that really stayed with me and struck me, because he just said, there's bad example that's been set, and it's discouraging. But I don't want you to be afraid of the priesthood or of religious life. I don't want you to be discouraged by the bad example that's given by some. But remember the vast majority of priests and religious and seminarians whose only desire is to serve God and do good. And I remember I don't know if I heard that through a translation or if he said it in English, but all of a sudden it hit me. I'm a seminarian, and the only thing I really want is to serve God and do good. And I was given the words there for the deep desire of my heart. The one thing I really want is to serve God and do good. And that changed the whole way that I prayed about my vocation, because now it was, God, is this how you want me to serve you and do good?
Mm.
Is this how you want me to serve you, do good, and bring the gospel to people? And the more I prayed with that, the more it became really clear. Priesthood is the way that you're going to serve God and do good. There are many ways that you can serve God and do good, but I want it to be in the priesthood. And so I kind of kept going through college. There were ups and downs, of course. That's how discernment works. You keep going through the process, and sometimes it's great, sometimes it's really rough. Um, but yeah, so I finished college seminary and decided I definitely want to keep going. I'm not done with this yet. And more, it was I want to be a priest, not I'm called to be a priest,
Yeah.
or not only I'm called to be a priest. Like I'm doing this because I have to. It was I'm doing this because I really want this, and my desire is coming into line with God's desire.
Mhm. Yeah, no, and I love the way you put it as far as that idea of, yeah, asking, I want to serve God and I want to do good. I think so often people get caught up in vocational discernment as kind of a binary of, am I called to priesthood or religious life or marriage, right? And what's lost on them is the effects that they'll have on others and themselves, right? Like this concept that at the end of the day, our vocation is for other people, yes, but then also for ourselves, right? Like, what is the path God is calling you to be sanctified on? And pursue that. And by pursuing that, you'll end up in one of those two decisions.
Yeah,
And it's so often we don't get told our vocation is for us nearly enough, I don't think. Not in the selfish way, but just in the true, humility sense of we need purification and our vocation
yeah.
is that means by which we're purified.
I remember talking to an elderly priest in my diocese once. He's passed away, God rest his soul. But I asked him about his vocation. He told me that he went to his pastor and said, "I want to become a priest." And the pastor said, "All right, come with me," and brought him to meet the vocation director, who was pastor in another parish. Introduced him, and the vocation director said, "Well, why do you want to become a priest?" And he said, "Well, I think I could really do a lot to help people and And the pastor said, "Wrong. You want to be a priest to save your own soul and for the salvation of others."
Yeah.
He goes, okay, yeah, that's actually correct. Yes, that's the reason to become a priest. But then you realize that there's a very practical component of it, which is that you do get to help a lot of people, and what a gift
Mhm.
that is. Um, Obviously, there's lots of different ways, lots of different walks of life in which you can help people, in which you can serve them. But there is something unique about the priesthood. But you pursue the priesthood because it's the thing that the Lord has called you to, and that which he calls you to is the particular path to holiness that he wants you to follow for your own salvation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the irony of it is like when we accept that the pressure leaves us, like the weight comes off our shoulders of knowing of like, oh, it's not really me deciding. It's me deciding
Right.
to say yes. But I don't have to like, yeah, lose my mind over which one is in. It's not like a puzzle, right? We're not uncovering this puzzle that God has laid out
Right.
for us. It's no, we're saying yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now, day of ordination, what was that like? Take me through diaconate, priestly, those days
Wow.
that were just kind of the pinnacle of all of it.
Yeah. Uh, I think both days were very unique. I remember we had a priest who was a spiritual director when I was at the North American College in Rome, and he would always tell us that he marked his diaconate ordination anniversary in a very particular way. That was a very important day for him. And I remember asking him, Monsignor, why is that such a big deal for you? And he goes, well, because that's the day I promised celibacy. I thought, wow. And if celibacy is that total gift of self, celibacy is that way of offering yourself both to God and to His people and to the church. It is a form of self giving, just as in marriage a man gives himself to his wife, right? So that was on my mind going into my diaconate ordination, that God's called me to something and I'm about to say yes. And this is the laying down of my life. And at that point, I was like 23, I think. And so I still didn't have that many friends who had gotten married yet. There were a
Mhm.
handful who had gotten married, but not many. Most of my friends got married 2 or 3 years later, and so I got to do their weddings as a priest, which was really cool. But they, like, I was the first one in a lot of my friend groups to actually take the plunge. It's just that mine was to the Lord and to the church,
Yeah.
and everybody else was, to this woman or to this man. Uh, what I remember most about the priesthood ordination, though, was the experience of the laying on of hands. And it was this combination of, as the bishop laid hands on me, knowing knowing beyond anything that I've ever experienced. I didn't feel it in the same way at my diaconate, and that's because it's two different degrees of holy order. So there is a distinction, there is a difference in what happens with the imposition of hands at presbyteral ordination. And so as the bishop laid hands, I knew something was changing. I knew that everything about me was really and truly now being transformed. But then the newly ordained, or the newly laid hands on priest goes and kneels, and all the priests who are present come up and lay hands also, because they share in the bishop's priesthood. And so it's that sharing in the priesthood that's so powerful. And I remember I had my eyes closed because I was starting to cry. Um, and as I like just opened my eyes a little bit, I saw the feet that were standing in front of me, and I knew whose feet they were, which is that sounds like a weird thing to say, but I'm going to explain why it's
Yeah.
not weird. Um, it was the Franciscan priest who gave the vocation talk where I first heard the call to the
Wow.
priesthood. And it was like at the moment that I opened my eyes, he was standing in front of me, laying his hands on me. And like I had told him, I thought he knew the story. I didn't mean to do this, but I told him that morning, like over coffee while we were getting ready to leave for the ordination, that he was the priest who gave the talk that inspired me to start discerning. And
Wow.
he was really mad at me. He's like, why'd you tell me? I thought he knew. I thought, like, because he'd been such a part of my life. But it was so beautiful to have that moment. I have a picture also that I keep in my office of one of the priests, Father Joseph Link. And Father Link was the rector of our minor seminary, not in my time there, but he was a very, very beloved priest in our diocese. And he was terminally ill at that time. And so I have a picture of him laying hands on me at the ordination. And he passed away a few months later. And just to know that he was there, that was a huge gift, because I really admired his priesthood and his whole demeanor and his approach to everything.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I'm glad you bring up that particular moment in the right, because I think it's such a moving part. Because yeah, obviously, the important part is the bishop laying on of hands, but yeah, every time that I watch a newly ordained priest get there and all of his now brother priest laying their hands on, and having known a lot of the guys and been in seminary with them, knowing like the newer guys who are classmates of that newly ordained priest, and
Hmm.
probably always didn't get along. I've known guys who absolutely hated each other, but just kind of seeing in that moment that shared priesthood, and setting all of that aside and realizing, hey, well, we're on the same team
Yeah,
now. And it's the beauty of that, of realizing,
yeah,
priests who will never speak, or who probably don't even know each other, right, if they're new to the diocese. Just that community and that fraternity is something that every time in that particular moment is just so abundantly clear.
yeah. It's really powerful. We just had a priest pass away in my diocese, and at his funeral, the homilist, the good friend of his, a good priest friend, um, was talking about the different priests that had been important in Father Michael's life, and the way that these different priests had interacted with him and had supported him, whether it was when he was first starting out as a priest, the priest who really inspired his vocation, or many, many years later. And he talked about one of our newly ordained priests. And he said, when you as a seminarian would come to the priest retirement home and visit, he was so grateful to get to know you, and he was so excited for your ordination, and the friendship that you created with him really carried him at the end of his life. And then you came to visit him in the hospital, you came to see him, like that you remembered him meant the world. And I thought, I had no idea that this newly ordained priest even knew this deceased priest. I had no idea. And yet there's this bond that was created there. And that's the bond, the fraternal bond of the priesthood, that's so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So with all that, what's been your favorite part about being a priest all these years? What's a couple, one or two things that you're like, yeah, this is worth it?
I think the things that really stick out will always be the sacraments. There's nothing quite as powerful as being there in these moments to celebrate the sacraments with people. Um, Mass and confession, always top of the list. Always top of the list. But I've also been really privileged to discover in certain moments, like, this is why I was ordained. It was for this conversation. If nothing else ever happens in my priesthood, if this is the only thing that I ever am effective at doing, then this conversation was meaningful. To have people who decide to become Catholic, to have people return to the sacraments after many years after a conversation is really powerful. But there's also, like, there's the sad things that you realize this is why I'm here. I had a family that lost a 6 week old baby, and to pray with them, to be at their house, and to walk with them through that, and still, years later now, to walk with them. That was 5 or 6 years ago, and to still kind of be walking with them and supporting them. They're very dear to me, and I'm so grateful to know them. But I'll tell you what, after that baby's funeral, I thought to myself, if this is the only reason that God called me to be a priest, okay, I'll take it. But I also told the Lord, you make sure I never have to deal with this ever again. I don't want to do this again, because it's a horrible privilege. I mean, the things that we get to do as a priest, the places we get to go, to be with people in these moments, it's not because of anything that we do. And 16 years of priesthood has absolutely taught me that. This has nothing to do with me. This has everything to do with what God wants to do through me. This is what God wants to do for his people. Um, but then what graces I'm receiving in the midst of all of that. I mean, the number of times I've just thought, God, you're too good to me. I don't deserve any of this. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I was reflecting on the burden of discipleship not too long ago. In fact, it was on
Mhm.
the gospel with Jesus going and healing the just a couple days ago the son of the widow, and thinking how many times the apostles probably looked at Jesus saying, "Just stop! Like you're making this terrible for us." And because it wasn't just Jesus, like he
Right.
was never by himself; he was always doing these things and dragging them along with him. And
Yeah.
I liken that a lot to what I imagine priesthood is like, of like all these circumstances where Jesus has to be there, but because Jesus is there, that means you have to be there. And it's like how many times you throw up your hands, and you're like, Jesus, I get it, you're doing your thing, but do I have to come along? And the answer is yes. And
Yeah.
just realizing that that's the burden we all carry as disciples of like, Jesus is going to be in messy situations and then drag us along, and we can either, get on board with him and make the most of it and see the beauty of it. But yeah, it's not always fun.
Yeah. Well, I think about it too, like this summer. All right. You and I were together in Michigan for the week, and we had the Eucharistic procession at Catholic Art Work Camp, and it wouldn't end. It just
Yep.
kept going. It was like the longest procession of the whole summer, and it was in the hottest possible location. Oh, it was oppressive. And I remember just like walking around and carrying the monstrance. The monstrance weighed 300 pounds by the end of it. And I'm like, my arms are tired. I can't feel anything. I'm completely numb. And we reposed the Blessed Sacrament, and I like got back to that closet that I was using as a sacristy, and you came in and you helped me take the cope off. And I remember I sat down on the floor. I just sat there for like 10 minutes because I needed to recover. I was
Yeah.
dead. Like, physically, the priesthood can be exhausting. And yet, what's it for?
Yeah.
The one thing that, and this happens pretty consistently at Catholic Heart Work Camp, but it's got nothing to do with me. It's got everything to do with the fact that we give kids access to Jesus in adoration. But that adoration night is consistently the highlight. That's the thing. Year after year, I hear this from people. Jesus did something for me in adoration. My experience before Jesus, while I was kneeling in front of the Eucharist, was this. It's got nothing to do with anything else. It's got everything to do with Jesus. And you realize, if that's the thing, then let me let me be the mule, the donkey that carries Jesus in, because I don't think the donkey had any clue who he was carrying, but he knew what his job was.
Yeah, and then again, the glory that will be hopefully the hindsight of heaven, right? To look back and to realize that, yeah, as you're walking out the door because you thought you were done, the one kid that you realized, oh, I missed, let me go back to it, the monstrance, You don't know who it is. I don't remember who
I
it
couldn't
is.
see anything. It was dark in there.
Yeah, and who knows, what that kid is going to do and what that moment was and what Christ said to that kid in that moment that, might even be the years off the purgatory that you hopefully won't have to serve, but because of
Yeah,
the good works that they do later on. Yeah, just the beautiful web that
right.
the Holy Spirit creates from those moments is
So
incredible.
powerful. And it finally got Amanda to put a picture of me on
Yeah.
Catholic Artwork Camp social media, so I'm good.
That's fair. We were just waiting for the right one. It had to be the perfect one. Yeah. So let's get in that because I think that kind of sums up a lot. So yeah, this summer we had the privilege of you were on the road all of the time. For I guess how many
Did a
what?
f- I did a full month, yeah, June 1st to June 30th.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
It's incredible. Now in that I'm sure you had a lot of conversations. Where are young people at these days? What's kind of the conversations that they're having? What are they looking to priest for in today's world?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think that the things context in which they're looking for them changes. At the end of the day, I think people always want something real. I want a relationship with God. I want something that's real. I want to know where I'm supposed to go, what I'm supposed to do. I want a sense of peace about my life. It's just that the circumstances surrounding that desire get changed. And so there's lots of pressures, there's lots of different things. Um, each era has its own particular difficulties, but at the root of it all, the desire of the human heart doesn't really change. And so what I would notice is that we've got young men and women who are they want to do something good. They see that they have a capacity for good, but they don't always know how to do it. They don't always know where to go, and they have some sense that yeah, Jesus is real. God is there, but the world that we're living in says ignore that. The world that we're in says that doesn't matter, or if you're focused on your religion in some way, that makes you a bigot or whatever else you want to say. And they're kind of thinking, does that make me a bigot somehow? I don't think I'm a bigot. I don't hate people. So there's this like fear. What if I'm religious? Does that make me bad? So they need that reassurance that by following Jesus, they're doing a good thing, that it is in fact a good thing to follow the example of Jesus and not just his example, because he doesn't just teach us an ethical system, but to follow the person of Christ, who is salvation itself and who promises us something bigger than what we can ask for. So yeah, I just kept seeing this desire. I want to know the Lord. I want to do what's right, what's good. And there's also, I think, an enormous desire for healing. I think there are a lot of people who are in pain that we don't always realize they're carrying. And there's a lot of pains that get hidden now because of the way that we're able to use technology for a lot of stuff. So there's the really good uses of technology, like you and I can have this conversation right now because of the miracles of technology. But there's also a lot of stuff that's leading people into dark places and into pain, and they're looking for some kind of relief from that. And so this great desire that's on so many hearts is to not be stuck, to not be stuck in a place of burden, of anxiety, of depression, to not be stuck in the web of addiction. And so there's a desire for that freedom. And I think very often the beauty of our sacramental life is that our sacramental life is incarnational. So because it's incarnational, it gives people access to God in a way that isn't mediated by technology, but it's something that we can really grasp, something that we can really experience. And I don't know, I have the sense that for a lot of people coming to confession, for example, it might be the realest conversation they get to have. Um, and they need it. Like they need to be able to have that kind of honesty and that kind of openness. And they need somebody who can listen to them in return.
Yeah. With that, where do they start? Right. So, want to ask this in the context of discernment, but also just in
Yeah.
discipleship, because I think the answer is the same. Where do they start? You have a young person who is either kind of discerning their vocation or even just discerning a relationship with Christ. I think they might look at it and say, "Well, that's easy for you to say. You're a priest. You like this stuff." But they have they have this longing. And it might not be that easy. So where do you start with these kids in particular?
Yeah. I look at this. I think sometimes we need to tell people the truth. first. We've got to tell them something. And the thing to tell them is that they're loved by God, that they have a place in his plan and in his world. And sometimes that's actually the first thing that you've got to break through is that you are loved. They don't believe it. They don't believe
Yeah.
that that's possible. Um, and so there's just reaffirming that message. No, you are in fact loved, and not in like a hippy dippy, this is just silly. Let's just make everybody feel fuzzy and warm and everything. No, 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 no. This is you are loved in a way that is more profound than any Hallmark card could ever get you. Um, the love that God has for you is so far beyond what we can imagine. And that he knows every imperfection that you have. He knows every mistake you've ever made, and he loves you anyway. And just helping people to see those gifts and those realities is an enormously important thing. Um, but if I want to get people started, it's first they need to know that truth that they're loved. But then they need to be introduced to the one who loves them. And the best place to introduce them to the one who loves them is in the Eucharist. What I find is really interesting is that sometimes the best way is not through the mass. Sometimes you got to just bring them to a chapel where there's a tabernacle, or bring them to an adoration chapel, or to have an experience of adoration, and let Jesus do the work. And then, maybe later they'll start to appreciate what's happening in the mass a little bit more. Um, but in any case, however you do it, like get them in front of the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And then the other part is remind them that they can be forgiven and help them to receive that forgiveness. Because we're living in a world that not only says everything you do is fine and nobody can ever judge you for doing anything. And if they tell you that you're doing something wrong, they're judging you and that's bad. But we also live at the very same time in a world that says, and if you ever do anything bad, you can never be forgiven. There's no coming back. You're done forever. That's the irony of cancel culture, right? Is that it tells us nobody can judge me except everybody can judge me.
Yep.
That's a
Yep.
really dangerous place
And
to
at
be.
all times for things that I'm not even saying now, but things that I may have said years ago. So
Right.
even that's not covered. Yeah.
Right. Things that I said years ago in a different context at a different time in my life when I didn't have the maturity or the outlook that I have now. It doesn't matter. There's no mercy anywhere in the world. And then they're also being told, and the church hates you, or the church
Yep.
hates this class of people or this type of person. And if you can remind them of how deeply they are loved by God and that God's mercy is always available to them, then when they come to confession, for example, they're received with that love that God has for them. And they're able to experience something of what that mercy looks like. So people need that mercy. And then when they've been reminded that they're loved by God, they've been introduced to Jesus in the Eucharist, they've learned how to say they're sorry and how to receive mercy. Um, I always tell them, like, if you want to know what God wants you to do, start asking his mother. Right. So devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary is huge. It's so important in that discernment because when we go to Mary, the only thing she's going to do is point us to the heart of her son. It's the only thing she wants is for us to go to Jesus. Like she loves us, but she wants us going to Jesus. But the more we go to her, the more she paves the way. Like she gets rid of the obstacles. She's the original steamroller parent, right? But in the best possible sense of steamroller
Yeah.
parent. She's going to get past all the nonsense. And when we put ourselves under Mary's care, she just takes us right to her son.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're spot on with this idea of, yeah, just starting with the fact of we say all of these things like, oh, you're loved, you can be forgiven, Christ loves you. But I think it does, feel watered down or go in one ear and out the other. But it reminds me of like, fine, if you want to take the skeptic's path and, debate the historicity of the resurrection, the one thing we can't debate is the historicity of the crucifixion, right? Like we know that that happened. Even skeptics agree that yes, this person
Yeah.
named Jesus was crucified. That alone shows, that okay, well, if he was on the cross, even if he didn't rise, well, that means that he was still there, and those words of his forgiveness there, and there was a perfectly innocent person who did die, forgiving his enemies and being that selfless victim. That alone is enough to kind of stir your heart to realize, oh wait, this might be true. Um, and then the beauty of it then comes to the fact of like, on top of that, we do know now that he did walk out of the tomb. But even to get there,
Right.
and that he was willing to lay down his life, is that first invitation of, you should probably take this guy seriously and take the words that he loves us seriously, because he was up there, and we know that for a fact.
Right, right. You ever hear Father Robert Spitzer talk about the resurrection? He's amazing. And he goes right into it. And man, you get him going and he's just off to the races. And then you realize at the end of the first 3 minutes, you were more convinced than you'd
Yeah.
ever, like, I already believe in the resurrection. And I'm so much more convinced having listened to him speak that, but I believe it even more now.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And like those are the moments. Those are the moments that I think that, yeah, it's there. And that's why you and I are sitting here 2000 years later still talking about it, because it's real, and we know that. And yeah, the beauty of that means that that's what turns those nice, lofty phrases of, oh, he loves you and unconditionally, forgive you, into actual words that actually have meaning. Because that's not nearly as profound as the resurrection. So it's incredible. Um, I know we're kind of closing a little bit, but I want to ask you a quick question. I know you have a deep love for marriage prep and for married
Yeah.
couples and that aspect of your ministry. What's your best advice? Maybe someone has been like, "Hey, okay, look, I've done the discernment thing. I'm not called to the priest. I'm not called to religious life, but dating seems like even more of a cross. Marriage seems even more of a cross. What's your advice to them?"
Yeah. I think it's probably changed over the years. I think it's probably changed over the years. I have to be really honest. I don't know what to tell people right now about dating. Now, I'm many years removed from the
I say
last
it's
time I
probably
went
a
on a
good thing.
date.
That's a
Yeah, exactly. No, that's a positive thing, but no, I mean just the culture surrounding dating has so changed, right? And so there's a lot of things I'm not really sure what to do. And I also know that for a lot of people, trying to find somebody who shares with them the things that they share is the things they believe most dearly is really hard. Um, and then I think another piece of it, and this might be where the advice would start to come in. Um, there's a lot of people out there who are walking wounded, and far more, I think, than in the past. The stuff, the challenges that people are carrying, um, there's a lot of stuff, and very often it's things that have gone unaddressed in their life. Um, I'm thinking in particular of addiction, and particularly addiction to pornography. That's become such a prevalent thing. And so I guess for those who aren't married yet, or who are like dating, the one big thing would be like recognize the places in your life where you need healing and bring that to the Lord and start working on it. Um, don't think that it's that your wounds are something that have to stay hidden, or that you just have to deal with it. It's just the cross that you have to bear. It's not. It's not the thing that God wants you to deal with. Like He wants to heal you. Um, and then in that, to realize that in a relationship, if you're the only one working on your wounds, have any wounds, everything is fine. Their own need. If somebody's already found healing, thanks be to God, right? But they're going to know that they found that healing, and they're going to encourage you in that finding healing. And then I guess the last thing I always tell people is it's not your job to fix them. I've more than once had that conversation with people where they're thinking I've just got to help this person, male or female. It could be my boyfriend, it could be my girlfriend, whoever it is. I've got to help them just get to this next level of their faith. That's really my job. That's why God put them in my life. No, that's not why God put them in your life. It's not your job to fix every problem or to tolerate every problem for that matter. Um, but that can be a big challenge. And then for the couples that are engaged, it's this is your time to really make sure that you've had every conversation, that you've made clear your desires, your plans, your intentions, that you've also like just talked about every aspect of the different challenges of life, and not just to talk about it, to learn how to fight, uh, and more than learning how to fight, learn how to pray together. A lot of couples don't know how to pray together, and praying with another person is awkward. I'm a priest,
yeah.
and I can say that because I am constantly asked to pray with people and to pray for people. It can be really awkward. It can be uncomfortable. Um, I, at least as a priest, have the ability to turn it into I'm just giving you a blessing, but like to pray with somebody is not always a really comfortable thing, but it's also a hugely intimate act.
Yep.
It's a vulnerability. It's an openness. And I think it's one of the hardest things to teach couples. And because the only thing that teaches them is practice. And so I
Yeah.
can just give them pointers, but then they have to actually go and practice sitting together in front of Jesus and praying.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I remember those first couple times that Amanda and I prayed together, and it was weird. And yeah, same thing. Like she was a youth minister. I was teaching theology and spent years in the seminary, and like we had both prayed with people, and quite literally were professional, prayers in a sense.
Your professional
Um,
prayers. Yes,
yeah,
yes, that's perfect.
and it was still weird, and it was still weird, and I think it was that intimacy part that you talked about, because in this sense of, and as it should be, right, because prayer is that most intimate conversation. It's us, talking with God, who knows us and loves us, and even beyond ourselves, and then you're letting in another third party in on that conversation,
Yeah.
but it's transformative, as prayer always is. Um, but I do think that, yeah, as soon as you can, start praying, because then, it's only going to make better. And what I've found within my own marriage too is, those times that I know that I need prayer, it's not weird for me to go to Amanda and say, "Hey, can you pray for this? Hey, pray for me about this," or "Hey, this is going on." Um, Whereas in the past, I would just have to deal with it myself. And yeah, just like letting that part of you be shown, because if that's the end goal, right, of marriage, is that level of intimacy. Um, yeah, you're absolutely right. It starts with that prayer, but it doesn't make it any less awkward.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a good friend and he says that he wants marriage prep to be changed. And it's just on repeat for as long as you need to, just saying till death, till death, till death, till death. And this reminder that there really is a life that you're going to build together. And that life that you build together is right up to the moment of whichever one of you dies first. Um, but that's what it means to be faithful. That's what it means. So I promise to be faithful to you. I promise to love you, to honor you. I promise in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, right? Um, what a gift that is. But a lot of times we think I've got to have the plan all worked out. And look, I discerned the priesthood. I didn't know what was going to happen as a priest, right? And I think that's the best part of it is you discern the vocation and you set the groundwork. That don't get me wrong, it's really important to do the formative work. It's important to, for a priest, you got to have the education, you got to have the practical skills, you've got to learn how to do a lot of things. For a couple, they've got to get to know each other. They need to build up communication skills. They have to actually love one another. It's this crazy idea about marriage, they have to do these things, but then they have to learn how to be married, and the only way to learn how to be married is to be married. And till death, you've got so much time to figure it out. And that's so much better than trying to have everything laid out, all the plans made and everything else. And I think a lot of that mentality of we're going to plan everything, we're going to have it all laid out perfectly, we're going to do everything exactly the right way. That's starting to weigh on our society and it's starting to weigh on people's minds. They don't want that anymore. I'm increasingly convinced that that's not what they want. They want something different. And so they're looking for a different way. How can I live this out without having every I dotted and T crossed? How can I do something different? And they want the adventure. And that's the beauty of any vocation is that you're going with God. You're embracing what he's calling you to do, and you're saying, I'm going to dive in and figure it out as I go along. If you told me some of the stuff that I would do as a priest when I was in seminary, I wouldn't have believed you. If you told me some of the situations that I would have ended up in, even as a seminarian, knowing that this is what priests do, I wouldn't have believed you.
Yeah.
That's the beauty
Yeah,
of it.
absolutely. And I'm glad you used that word adventure, because as you were talking, that's exactly what came to my mind, is that is like, yeah, that is the adventure of discipleship. And
Yeah.
again, and that's what the vocation is, just the, particular path of that adventure that you and me and all of us are called particularly to. But it's that same thing. Again, it's that following Christ, no matter where he goes, and Christ gets himself into some pretty precarious situations. He's good at that. That's his job, right? The
Right,
heralding of
right.
hell, right? Like that's where he goes. He goes to the parts where no one wants to go, and that's the joy of discipleship, is he brings us with him, and then has a particular place he wants to bring you and me and everyone listening. Last little bit for you, last question is like, what is you spent some time as vocation director. What is like the number one stop, do not do,
Mhm.
like vocational discernment red flag, whether it's watching hours and hours of YouTube videos of people answering the question, or, it's going to every religious order ever before you decide? What's your like number one red flag?
Yeah, there's a couple of pitfalls. Um, one is the fear of messing up and thinking like the thing that's really holding me back from doing this thing that I think God wants me to do is that I'm in the future going to mess things up. And what that does is it's unintentional. I had this thought myself as I was discerning. What happens if I do something wrong, or if I really screw up someday? It's not a bad thought to have, like to be thinking ahead of what could happen. But it's also not necessarily realistic. And so you're basing your discernment off of a potential future possibility, very much the subjunctive tense here, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't help. You want to like stay really grounded. So stay in the present moment, asking the Lord what he wants you to do now. But another sort of related piece to that is really easily getting distracted by something shiny. So for a young man discerning the priesthood, uh, this happens, I don't know, let's say 9 times out of 10. I don't know if it's really that high, but let's call it 9 times out of 10. He's discerning the priesthood. And as he's really starting to seriously think about what God wants him to do, and he's really thinking God wants him to be a priest, he then meets a girl. And she's wonderful and she's lovely and she's Catholic. And wouldn't that be great? And yeah, it would be. But just because she's Catholic and just because she smiled at you, first of all, doesn't mean that she likes you or is attractive to you. But furthermore, it doesn't mean that you're called to marriage with her. Um, but it can be really easy to get distracted, and it's important to like acknowledge what's going on. Don't get me wrong. Like if you see something, if you recognize that there's an attraction to this person, this relationship has become a part of my life, that's a good thing to be able to recognize. But just because something is new or exciting or shiny or whatever doesn't mean that all of this other stuff that God has been leading you to is now done. It simply means that maybe God's trying to give you a different perspective. And so it's really important to not get pulled instantly by every little thing that comes your way. Um, and so in that discernment, like stay grounded. And it really helps to have a spiritual director who can help you to keep your feet on the ground.
No, I love that, the idea of like God's not calling future you, he's calling present you, he's calling you as you exist. He's not worried about you 20 years from now, because in 20
Yeah.
years from now he's still going to be calling present you these
Present you. Yeah,
false
exactly.
realities.
Exactly.
Well, Father, I love it, and we could talk for hours, and I know that your words have always been very clear on discernment. I'm sure that they've helped many, many people, but not nearly as much as I'm sure your actions have. Seeing them firsthand, and just your joy of your priesthood, and just there's no better vocational testimony than somebody who's authentically living out their particular vocation. So thank you for that. I'm very envious of your parishioners who get to see that of you every week and every day. But thank you for sharing what you can
Thanks,
in a
Thomas.
little, small window and over the sound waves, because even that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it, Thomas. That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, people who are going to be profoundly moved by this and they want to hear more of Father Sam Kachuba, I know you have a lot of different things going on. What are some of the things you want
Yeah.
people to check out?
Please check out The Tangent on Veritas Catholic Network. It's a podcast that I do with my co-host and former student, Matt Sparaza. Then also with Veritas, I have a daily gospel reflection that comes out every day. Just a short reflection on the gospel of the day, and a chance to pause and meditate and be with the Lord for just about 2 minutes. Those are probably the two big ones for me. But I also do some work with the Catholic Psych Institute. Catholic Psych provides a lot of mentorship and accompaniment for people as they're working to grow. In particular, the work that I'm doing with Catholic Psych is geared towards priests. So to please pray for the priests that I work with, and to encourage priests if they could use some help, to come seek me out at Catholic Psych.
Nice, awesome. I love it. And yeah, as I mentioned, I'll link all of those down below. And yeah, a big fan of both of those, or all three of those projects. But again, it's nice every single day, the 2 minute gospel reflections that are actually 2 minutes. So many times it's false advertising, and it's like, oh, here's a quick gospel reflection, and they're like 10 minutes, or there's advertising. Like, no, this is literally Father Sam talking about the gospel for 2 minutes. It's great, super accessible. Love it.
I'll tell you what, those 2 minutes are because of Matt's editing skills. He's able to like pull out all the little pauses, all the little ums.
Dang, well, it works. So, like I said, I love it. But Father, thank you again. And yeah, count on my prayers and everyone's listening prayers. And hopefully we can have a conversation again soon.
Awesome. Thomas, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. I love this mission with your podcast. It's so good to see. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.